Master Sergeant Joseph Bauer lowered his binoculars, his face pale as morning fog. Through the trees surrounding the Belgian village of Marcourt, he could see hundreds of American soldiers moving into position. Machine gun nests, mortar teams, rifle squads, all perfectly visible in the dawnlight. The Wehrmacht company of 160 men, under his command, was outnumbered at least 10-1. But something was wrong. The Americans moved strangely mechanically, and their rifles never caught the sunlight properly. Then a gust of wind knocked over an entire machine gun crew, and Bauer realized the impossible truth. They were wooden, every last one of them. A lone American carpenter named Eddie Foster had fooled an entire German company with an army made of lumber and paint. When one creative mind can outsmart an entire military force, those are the stories that change how we see warfare. If ingenuity defeating might fascinate you, you'll want to subscribe for more untold tales. January 12, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was winding down, but isolated German units still held pockets throughout the Ardennes forest. Private Eddie Foster, a carpenter from Pittsburgh, found himself alone after his unit was scattered by a German counterattack. He'd taken shelter in Marcourt's abandoned sawmill, discovering tools, lumber, and paint left behind by fleeing civilians. Most soldiers would have hidden and waited for rescue. Eddie saw opportunity. The idea came while watching German patrols through the village. They were nervous, constantly checking windows and doorways, clearly expecting American reinforcements. Eddie realized that fear was a weapon, and he had the skills to weaponize it. Before the war, he'd built movie sets in Hollywood for 2 years, creating illusions that looked real from a distance. Now, with his life depending on it, he would build his greatest illusion. Working through the night by candlelight, Eddie created his first dummy soldier. Using lumber for frame, stuffed civilian clothes to the body, and a carved wooden rifle, it looked convincing from 50 feet away. He positioned it in a window where morning light would create realistic shadows. Then he built another and another. By dawn, he had 12 dummy soldiers positioned throughout buildings facing German positions. The effect exceeded his wildest hopes. German observers reported American troops occupying the village in strength. Eddie, watching from his hidden position, saw Wehrmacht soldiers frantically fortifying their positions, preparing for an assault that would never come. But Eddie wasn't satisfied with static dummies. Using fishing line and pulleys salvaged from the sawmill, he rigged several figures to move. One would lean out of a window, another would walk past a doorway, creating the illusion of active garrison. Lieutenant Colonel Hermann Richter, commanding the German force, called for reconnaissance. His scouts reported counting at least 40 American soldiers in defensive positions. With more arriving, Eddie had anticipated this. He created dummy soldiers in various poses, kneeling prone, standing guard. He'd even positioned some partially hidden, allowing German imagination to fill in what they couldn't fully see. The human mind, Eddie knew, was his greatest ally in maintaining the deception. The masterstroke came when Eddie found a cache of fireworks in the church basement, apparently saved for a victory celebration that never came. He rigged them with long fuses to simulate muzzle flashes from different buildings. That night, as Germans watched, the village erupted in what appeared to be weapons training or communication signals. Eddie ran between positions, lighting fuses, creating the sound and fury of an entire company preparing for battle. By the second day, Eddie had expanded his wooden army to 60 figures. He gave them ranks, painting appropriate insignia on helmets he'd carved from soft pine. He created a wooden radio operator, complete with carved equipment, visible through the post office window. Most importantly, he built what appeared to be a heavy weapons platoon, wooden mortars, a convincing replica of a 50 caliber machine gun, even a bazooka team. From German positions 400 yards away, they looked deadly real. The psychological pressure on German forces was building. Richter's men hadn't slept properly, constantly watching for the expected American attack. They were burning through ammunition, firing at Eddie's dummies whenever wind made them move. Morale was cracking. Soldiers began reporting that American numbers were growing hourly. Fear multiplied Eddie's wooden army in German minds from dozens to hundreds to eventually over 1,000. Eddie faced his own challenges. He had to maintain the illusion while finding food and water, avoiding German patrols, and fighting exhaustion from constantly repositioning his dummies to suggest movement and reinforcement. He developed a routine: move 20 figures before dawn, create new ones during the day, stage his firework displays at night. He was fighting a one-man psychological war, with wood and paint as his only weapons. The third morning brought Eddie's closest call yet. A German patrol, emboldened by desperation, approached within 100 yards of the village perimeter. Eddie watched from the church bell tower as Sergeant Klaus Weber led 6 men toward what Eddie had designated as main defensive line, 23 wooden soldiers positioned behind rubble barricades. Eddie's hands trembled as he pulled the fishing line that made his wooden lieutenant appear to raise binoculars. The Germans immediately dove for cover, and Weber ordered retreat, reporting heavy American presence ready to repel any assault. Eddie knew he needed to escalate the deception or risk discovery. Using bed sheets and black paint, he created unit insignia suggesting multiple companies were present: the 28th Infantry Division's Bloody Bucket, the 82nd Airborne's AA, even a fabricated artillery unit patch. He positioned these flags where German observers could see them partially, letting imagination fill the gaps. To German intelligence, it appeared that Americans were massing forces from multiple elite units for a major offensive. The lumber supply was running low, so Eddie got creative. He carved convincing heads and hands, attaching them to bundles of straw and garbage to create bodies. Church pews became rifle stocks. Fence posts transformed into mortar tubes. He discovered that organ pipes, when positioned correctly, created an optical illusion resembling machine gun barrels. Every piece of debris became potential military equipment in Eddie's hands, his carpenters seeing weapons where others would see wreckage. Lieutenant Colonel Richter convened an emergency meeting with his officers. The consensus was that Americans had at least 800 men in Marcourt, with more arriving nightly. They could hear trucks, actually Eddie dragging metal sheets across gravel. They could see supply deliveries, Eddie moving the same crates between buildings. They intercepted radio traffic. Eddie had found a damaged radio that transmitted only static, which he broadcast at regular intervals to simulate coded messages. Eddie's greatest innovation came from studying German routines. He noticed they observed most intensely at dawn and dusk, so he scheduled his most elaborate deceptions for these times. Using mirrors salvaged from destroyed buildings, he created the illusion of movement in windows where no dummies existed. Candlelight behind colored glass simulated muzzle flashes. He even hung helmets on pendulums, creating constant motion that suggested sentries walking post. January 17th dawned with unusual activity in German positions. Eddie watched through his binoculars as Wehrmacht soldiers argued among themselves, gesturing frantically toward Marcourt. Lieutenant Colonel Richter was losing control. His men had spent 5 sleepless nights waiting for an attack from a superior force that existed only in their minds. When Richter ordered preparation for a preemptive assault, half his officers refused, convinced it was suicide to attack what they believed were 1,000 entrenched Americans. Eddie knew he had to act decisively. With help from the 3 real soldiers, Private Tom Collins, Corporal Mike Davidson, and Private First Class Anthony Romano, he orchestrated his most elaborate performance. They positioned Eddie's wooden tank at the village entrance, surrounding it with dummy infantry in attack formation. Using the last fireworks synchronized with flashlights covered in red cellophane, they created the illusion of artillery preparation. The Germans, seeing what appeared to be the beginning of a massive assault, began destroying their own heavy equipment to prevent capture. The panic in German ranks was palpable. Sergeant Weber openly challenged Richter's orders to hold position, arguing they should retreat while possible. Other soldiers began abandoning positions without orders. Eddie seized this moment of chaos. Using the damaged radio, he had Romano, who spoke some German, broadcast a surrender ultimatum. They gave Richter 2 hours to surrender or face the full assault of what they claimed was the entire 2nd Battalion, 110th Infantry Regiment, reinforced with armor and artillery. Inside German headquarters, a converted farmhouse, Richter faced mutiny. His junior officers presented a united front: surrender or they would relieve him of command. They cited the impossible odds, the depleted ammunition, the exhausted state of their men. Richter's radio operator had been documenting the American buildup for days, his reports now used as evidence against continuing resistance. No one wanted to die fighting an overwhelming force when the war was clearly lost. Eddie watched through binoculars as white flags began appearing in German positions. But he couldn't simply accept surrender with 4 real soldiers and a wooden army. He needed to maintain the illusion through the surrender process. Working frantically, Eddie and his 3 companions positioned dummies at key locations where surrendering Germans would pass. They draped sheets over positions to suggest more troops behind them. Most critically, they positioned themselves where they could appear multiple times in different uniforms, creating the illusion of numerous officers. At precisely noon, Richter emerged under a white flag, accompanied by Weber and 2 other officers. Eddie, wearing lieutenant's insignia he'd taken from a damaged uniform, met them in the village square. Behind him, Collins and Davidson stood at attention, while Romano remained hidden, ready to move dummies if needed. Eddie accepted Richter's surrender with practiced military bearing, hiding his amazement that his deception had worked completely. The surrender negotiations revealed the extent of German belief in Eddie's creation. Richter asked for honorable terms for his men, who had faced such overwhelming odds. He requested medical attention for wounded, not knowing Eddie had no medics. He asked about prisoner provisions, unaware Eddie had no way to guard or feed 160 prisoners. Eddie, thinking quickly, stated that full battalion staff would arrive shortly to process the surrender, buying time to figure out what to do with an entire company of Wehrmacht soldiers. As German soldiers filed into the village square to stack arms, they passed Eddie's wooden army. In daylight, up close, the deception should have been obvious, but psychological conditioning was complete. Exhausted Germans saw what they expected to see, American soldiers watching their surrender. Some even saluted the wooden officers. One soldier later testified he had conversed with a dummy sentry, interpreting its silence as American arrogance rather than wooden construction. The surreal scene peaked when Sergeant Weber approached what he thought was an American machine gun position to surrender his sidearm. The wooden gunner, carved by Eddie with particular care, sat behind the carved weapon with painted eyes staring straight ahead. Weber placed his pistol at the dummy's feet, saluted, and walked away. Eddie, watching from nearby, struggled to maintain his composure as Germans surrendered to his lumber creations. Eddie's biggest challenge came when Richter requested to speak with the American commander. Eddie promoted himself to captain for the meeting, explaining the colonel was dealing with other surrendering units, a lie that reinforced German beliefs about American strength. He assigned Collins and Davidson to guard the prisoners, while Romano ran between buildings, moving dummies and creating noise to suggest ongoing military activity. The situation became critical when Richter mentioned German reinforcements might arrive within hours. Eddie hadn't considered this possibility. If fresh German troops arrived before real American forces, the deception would collapse catastrophically. Eddie made a desperate decision. He told Richter that American artillery was zeroed on all approaches, and any German reinforcements would be annihilated. He suggested Richter radio his headquarters to warn them off, preventing unnecessary casualties. Richter's radio message to German headquarters would become one of the war's most extraordinary communications. He reported surrendering to overwhelming American forces, estimating at least 1,000 soldiers with armor support in Marcourt. He urgently warned against sending reinforcements, describing precise artillery registration and defensive positions that existed only in Eddie's imagination. German headquarters, trusting their experienced officers' assessment, diverted reinforcements elsewhere, essentially protecting Eddie's deception from discovery. 2 hours after surrender, Eddie faced 160 disarmed German soldiers sitting in the village square, guarded by 4 Americans and surrounded by wooden dummies. The situation was impossibly precarious. Eddie ordered the Germans to remain in formation, claiming American infantry were positioned in surrounding buildings with orders to shoot anyone who moved. In reality, those buildings contained only Eddie's wooden creations, their painted eyes maintaining an eternal, unblinking watch. Private Collins discovered a solution in the surrendered German supplies. Detailed maps showing American positions 15 miles west. Real American forces were closer than anyone had thought. Eddie made another crucial decision. He told Richter that as a gesture of good faith, he would allow the German radio operator to contact American headquarters to arrange prisoner transportation. What Richter didn't know was that Eddie was actually calling for rescue, using German equipment to request immediate assistance to secure prisoners. The wait was agonizing. Eddie and his 3 companions took shifts walking among the prisoners, tried to appear like different soldiers by changing helmets and jackets. They moved wooden dummies periodically, maintaining the illusion of an active garrison. When a German soldier asked for water, Eddie had to refuse, claiming supplies were reserved for American troops. In reality, he had no supplies to give. The wooden army stood silent sentinel, their presence more psychological than physical. At 1,600 hours, salvation arrived in the form of Captain William Harrison's reconnaissance company. Harrison, responding to the radio call, expected to find a battalion-strength unit with prisoners. Instead, he discovered for exhausted Americans, 160 German prisoners, and an army of wooden soldiers. His initial anger at what seemed like a prank turned to amazement as Eddie explained the 5-day deception that had neutralized an entire German company without firing a shot. Captain Harrison's after-action report would read like fiction. He documented 67 wooden soldiers, 12 carved weapons positions, 1 wooden tank, and elaborate pulley systems for creating movement. He interviewed German prisoners, who, even after learning the truth, struggled to believe they had been deceived by one carpenter with lumber and paint. Sergeant Weber famously said he would rather admit defeat by 1,000 Americans than accept being fooled by wooden dolls. The psychological impact on the surrendered Germans was profound. Several officers requested transfers to prisoner camps far from their units, unable to face the shame of surrendering to an illusion. Others, however, expressed admiration for Eddie's ingenuity. Lieutenant Colonel Richter, in particular, stated that Eddie had demonstrated the art of war was not about numbers or weapons, but about controlling enemy perception. He called Eddie's wooden army the most effective psychological operation he had encountered in 6 years of combat. Eddie Foster received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions, though the full story remained classified until 1955. The citation mentioned extraordinary heroism and resourcefulness in deceiving enemy forces, but couldn't capture the surreal reality of one carpenter defeating an entire company with lumber and imagination. At the ceremony, Eddie remarked that he'd simply used skills learned building Hollywood sets, except this time the reviews were written in German surrender documents. The tactical implications of Eddie's deception rippled through military thinking. The U.S. Army established new doctrine for psychological operations, recognizing that perception management could achieve what direct combat couldn't. Training programs incorporated Eddie's techniques, teaching soldiers to use deception and misdirection as force multipliers. The wooden army of Marcourt became required study at military academies, demonstrating how creativity could overcome overwhelming disadvantage. Post-war analysis revealed the true scope of Eddie's achievement. The German company he neutralized was scheduled to reinforce a critical defensive position. Their 5-day delay and eventual surrender contributed to American breakthrough in the sector. Military historians calculated that Eddie's wooden army had the strategic effect of an actual battalion, tying down enemy forces and disrupting German defensive plans. One carpenter had achieved what would normally require hundreds of soldiers and substantial casualties. Eddie returned to Pittsburgh, but never resumed carpentry professionally. He became an art teacher, specializing in perspective and illusion. His students never knew their instructor had once commanded an army of wooden soldiers that brought real warriors to their knees. He kept one memento from Marcourt, the carved head of his wooden lieutenant, painted eyes still staring with the intensity that had convinced Germans of its reality. In 1965, a reunion was organized between Eddie and some German veterans from Richter's company. Sergeant Weber, now a successful businessman, brought Eddie a gift, a wooden soldier he'd carved himself, an acknowledgement of the artistry that had defeated him. The two men laughed about the absurdity of war, where a carpenter's imagination proved more powerful than rifles and tanks. Weber admitted that even 20 years later, he sometimes wondered if there hadn't been real soldiers mixed among the wooden ones. The village of Marcourt erected a monument to Eddie's wooden army in 1985. It features a bronze carpenter surrounded by wooden soldiers, with an inscription reading, "To Private Eddie Foster, who proved that in war, the mind is the ultimate weapon." Tourists often assume it's metaphorical until they learn the extraordinary truth of how one American carpenter, with a sawmill and imagination, convinced an entire German company they were surrounded by 1,000 soldiers who never existed. The lesson of Eddie Foster's wooden army extends beyond military strategy. It demonstrates that human creativity, applied with determination and courage, can overcome seemingly impossible odds. When faced with overwhelming force, Eddie didn't surrender or hide. He built an alternative reality so convincing that trained soldiers surrendered to shadows and lumber. His story reminds us that victory often belongs not to the strongest, but to the most creative, not to those with the most weapons, but to those who best understand human psychology. Thank you for joining us to discover this extraordinary tale of ingenuity defeating might. When one creative mind can outsmart an entire military force, it shows us that imagination remains humanity's greatest tool. If Eddie's story amazed you, please subscribe and share with others who appreciate the power of human creativity. What other unbelievable military deceptions would you like us to explore? Leave your comments below. And remember that sometimes the most powerful army is the one that exists only in the enemy's mind. Until next time, keep thinking creatively, because the next Eddie Foster might be you.